anything, including the Torah. So it's really mind-blowing. There's a soul level that even transcends the Torah. Because the Torah is God's wisdom, God's will incorporated into writing into the world. But somehow the souls are actually a component of God. And this is where, the famous quote in Tanya, that the soul is chelek elokami mal mamish, a real component, a real aspect of God and actuality and reality. I think this is one of the reasons Shlomo Kavach, Olav Shalom, always used to say mamish, because he was connecting with that really, really deep soul level. Because mamish means something that you can touch and feel. And so I think he was saying, as reflected in Tanya, that what's really here on this lowest level of existence somehow has an intimate connection with the ultimate, with the oneness of God, again, that preceded creation.
So whether it's good to, he's extremely needy. He's extremely needy. He's my oldest, and he could do a lot of things by himself, but extremely needy.
You tell him, if you're going to be good this whole week and not complain about anything like that, we'll take you out on Sunday, and I'll give you a special time.
And that's why, I'm sorry, I apologize to any dear friend if I hurt your feelings. I hate 1, 2, 3 logic. I hate methods. I hate methods that penalize children for being children. They are children. And if you replace the word needy with the word vulnerable, they feel that they are in danger. They are smaller. They don't have the same understanding of the world as we have. They are not sophisticated. You can't imagine how a small child can make a link from something that you think is completely innocent, passive, inane, and they think it's going to devour them alive. You don't know how their minds make these leaps. They're undeveloped. They are vulnerable. And, imagine if your spouse, someone you really loved, or someone who was your peer, Chas v'shalom, they had cancer, Chas v'shalom, something horrendous was wrong with them. And they needed to call you on the phone every day. And they needed 6 meals. And they needed to say, what's wrong with this woman? Why is she so needy? You'd say, no, she has cancer. She's dying. Why don't we give our children the same benefit of the doubt? We feel vulnerable. They feel vulnerable. We both feel. That's the thing. When your child is yelling at you, if they're a small child, if they're a teenager, sure, if my child said to me, you're stupid, I'd faint. I would collapse. I don't know what I would do. I'm not stupid. I'm not stupid. I have no question that if I tell my child something about what I think is correct for them, I am right. I do not question, I might be right, I might not be right, I'm not really sure. I'm really sure. I'm in charge. Hashem gave me this child. I am God to this parent. God is God to me. I model that relationship of God by being attached to my child. So, if you give your child from day one, and a lot of children are a huge empty bucket. I agree. My first child, oh my. And anybody who knows my first child knows he is a mensch. And he turned out menschlich, and he is still very needy. It hasn't stopped, but it has changed, and we can manage it. And it has different faces at different ages, and with teenagers, I'm sure it's much harder. I don't have teenagers. But, your child is needy. You'd be surprised how little it takes to fill that need. He wants you to put his shoes on. Well, my 4-year-old is like that. He wants his shoes put on. He can put his shoes on. I could scream at him and say, Shalom, you're 4 years old. I know you can put your shoes on. I have to get out the door. What's the matter with you? Or I could take, and I've done this with him 3 times in a row, of sitting down and saying, we're going to the store now. Let me put your shoes on, Zizkite. We're out the door in 6 seconds. Instead of the 16 minutes or the half an hour of temper tantrum that it would take to force this poor 4-year-old to put his shoes on to prove, that doesn't make me the parent. Proving and forcing isn't the parent. Showing the child, I'm attached to you, I love you, I will do for you, but you must have kavod for me. And that's what Hashem says too. I will do for you, I will give to you, but I'm in charge of you, you have to have kavod for me. And so, if we don't model that for our children, why do you think so many children are going off the derech? Children cannot relate to Hashem and they cannot relate to Torah because they cannot relate to their parents. The parents are abdicating responsibility from get-go. Here, be independent. Here, make your own decisions. Here, pick. They can't pick. They don't want to pick. They want us to help them. If even a teenager, they're screaming at you, they're threatening you, and don't think that children don't physically threaten.
This year, as the convention took place on very auspicious days in Eskislu, Gertzeit, and led us to Mikkel Rebbe. Last night and today, Yud Kislev, which is the Yom HaGula of Mikkel Rebbe, the redemption of Mikkel Rebbe in prison. Surely, these days were celebrated in the greatest, best possible way with learning and bringing. Rebbe would always say that all the ulos, all redemptions are interconnected, and therefore Gula Yud Kislev is interconnected with the final Gula. Especially we're just a few days away. This week is Dalet Kislev, which is the Rebbe's wedding date, which the Rebbe said began his connection with our generation. This year is 80 years of the Rebbe's Chasana, which we know to Geula, 8 being a number that is higher than the world, which was created in 7 days. So Hashem should help that the merit of all these days and all the learning and all the kabrenings and all the tircha, this kiss of the Geula Shlem.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Colorado. In yesterday's parsha, we read Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva. Beersheva, that's Yaakov, left Beersheva. Why did Yaakov leave the spiritual comforts of Beersheva to go to Haran, a place that was full of anger, arousing anger in Hashem's eyes? Because Yaakov Avinu, we are told, went there. He did something which reflected going down into the exile. And the purpose is to uplift the exile, to make this world, this very world, a dir lo yizbarach b'tachtonim, a dwelling place for the divine. This is our purpose for being here, to take a place. We're still in Golus, and our prayer is that we should go out of Golus, that Mashiach should come right away. And before we bench for today's banquet, we should go to Eretz Yisrael and bench over there together with Mashiach. The Tzemach Tzedek told a Chassid, a disciple of his, Machdo Eretz Yisrael, that we should transform this place outside Israel into one of holiness of Israel. And this is a convention, a retreat of women. And women are in the vanguard, in the forefront of transforming a home into a mikdash, into a temple, transforming a Friday night into Shabbos, and transforming a world riddled with darkness into a world permeated with light and goodness and godliness. I want to share a story with you that happened many years ago in Montreal, Canada, where I come from, the island of Montreal. One day there was a little girl who was walking with her mother. She couldn't have been more than about 7 years old. And she wanted something from her mother, and her mother told her no. And children did what they're best at doing. They got angry. What does a little 7-year-old do when she gets angry? She walked over to a pole, a light pole, took her impressionable little foot and gave that pole a kick. Like we say in Yiddish, gestarkt zu sein. And at that moment, there was a blackout that turned the whole island of Montreal into darkness. And by divine providence, it happened at a split second that this little girl kicked the lamppost. When she saw the devastating effect of her actions, she ran crying. She was hysterical. She went crying to her mother, "Oi, now she's going to be in trouble. Look what she did." End of story. Observation. If through the eyes of a little 7-year-old girl, one little act can produce so much darkness, imagine what effect we can have, how much light we can bring into this world with an act of a mitzvah. When we light the Shabbos candles, when we invite someone to our Shabbos table, we learn a little more Torah. We can do it, and the women, you are the ones, we need you because you are the ones who inspire us being the community, us being the husbands and the fathers. You are the ones. We are told, Bishvil Nashim Tikanyas, because of the righteous women, we left Egypt, and so it is.
my pleasure to call on Meredith Gibbs. It's a real honor for me to have Meredith. It's very long, but I'm reading one little.
Life will never be the same when Colorado meets the East Coast. Each one hopefully will learn from the other. So little did I know when I set the topic for this talk that would only be a week after the terrible tragedy in India. This question really, does the soul choose its destiny before birth? So there has to be some premises that we need to set up in order to have some sense of what's happening in life, what life is all about. That there is a difference between spirit and matter is very clear. More and more people in the world are becoming aware that there's a spiritual essence behind all physical reality. About, I think now it would be 40 years ago, I was in a house on December 25th that burned down in the middle of the night. My ex-husband and I, we had some tenants who weren't Jewish, and they had a Christmas tree that they left on all night that got short at 1:25 a.m. Before and after all the shock and the sadness, there was a moment I had, a moment of euphoria, when I realized that was really, really valuable in my life could never be taken away by anything physical, by any physical destruction. And that really, really changed my life forever. And hopefully nobody has to go through that personally. But when you hear about it, read about it, know somebody, unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, that has gone through that kind of an experience, so like the Rebbe used to say, "V'hachai yitein el libo," the living person should take it to heart and really go deeper into understanding what life is all about. In Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, we're taught, Al korchecha ata chai, against your will you live, Val korchecha ata met, and against your will you die. Yeah. So this itself seems to set up a conflict, a contradiction really, both logically and practically. How can it be that you're living against your will and you're dying against your will? And if everything is against your will, because life and death basically cover all the bases, then how can it even be a question that your soul has any kind of a choice in its destiny? So this is the kind of context that I want to frame to set up my talk. We know also from a few Torah portions ago that Rivka Imenu, our matriarch Rivka, was pregnant with two twins. And Chazal, the rabbis tell us that when she went by a place of idolatry, something would move inside of her. When she went by a place of monotheism, something moved inside of her. So she kind of couldn't figure it out, like what kind of crazy mixed up kid went to, according to Chazal, she went to seek out God's input. Otherwise, we should be able to do that. But she went to Shem, she went to the son of Noach, who was the octogenarian of that era, and she was told, Shnei goyim b'vitnech, there are actually two nations inside of you. So you don't have one crazy mixed up kid, you have one person, you have two people with different kinds of tendencies. But in a way, in Hasidus, it's brought down that we all are like Rivka. We all are pregnant with different tendencies inside of us. Of course, we're taught in Tanya that there are two souls inside of us, the animal soul and the divine soul. And they are in conflict. So wherever we look in the world, in life, we see a dynamic of conflict. So, in a way, this helps us give some kind of clarity because, or I would say reassurance, because if there's conflict everywhere and there's one God, this is really the ultimate question that Kabbalists deal with, that all of Kabbalah literature deals with. How do you get from the oneness of God to a finite world? And in that finite world, there's competing dynamics, there's competing forces that are always, so to speak, at war with each other. So that's what I'm saying. We have some consolation because if we do believe in God, if that's our rock bottom faith, then that belief in God also entails a belief in oneness. So there has to be an overriding principle that can resolve all kinds of conflicts. And this is really the key foundation of the Messianic vision, that there will come a realization and enlightenment, a force in the world that will do what's popularly called nowadays conflict mediation on all levels, both within ourselves, within our families, within our communities, and the world. So that holographic model of the possibility of conflict resolution really gives us a perspective that, on one hand, we have to look at the conflicts and recognize that they're there, but there has to be from the beginning of creation a formula, so to speak, a perception, a way of looking at things that can resolve all kinds of conflict. And this is, I think, why it says, Chazal teach us that right in the beginning of creation, V'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim, the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the earth. And the rabbis say, Zeh ruach shel Mashiach, this is the spirit of Mashiach. So right there at the beginning of creation, we're taught also, the Talmud teaches us in Megillah that the Hashem creates the refuah, the healing, kodam lamaka, before the blow. So leads us into that idea that somehow that oneness of God and the oneness of the Torah and the oneness of the Jewish people will permeate all of existence. And that's the beginning, and that's the kind of end in history. And it's only this little middle part for 6,000 years or so that is giving us trouble. We'll be safe. Let's talk now about the soul. What is the soul? How does that fit in with God and with creation? So going back to Bereshit again, the very first word of the Torah, Bereshit, usually is translated in the beginning, but it actually means, according to the rabbis, for the sake of something that's called Reshit, for the sake of something that's called beginning, did Hashem create the world. So what is this Reshit? There's a basic machloket, a basic debate in the opening midrash of the Oral Torah. So one opinion says for the sake of the Torah, because the Torah in many places is called Reshit, is called beginning. Another opinion is Bishvil Yisrael, for the sake of Israel, that's also called the beginning. And the midrash puts it in the words, Yisrael Allah b'machshava. Israel came up in God's thought in the beginning. But the rabbis who are looking at these two midrashim say, well, you can't have two beginnings at the very same moment. If you're talking about a beginning, or you're already, this is what the rabbis say, the Torah starts with the letter Bet, not Aleph, because Bet is the second letter, and Bet is the number 2. It already represents duality. So as soon as you have creation, you have duality because you have a creator and you have creation. So the question is, what was the first? Kind of like with Rivka, who came up first? Who's on first? Adam Costello. Both can't be on first. So which is it? And finally, the Midrash says something very startling. The Midrash has a resolution at the end and says, Machshavtan shel Yisrael kadma l'chol davar. The thought of Israel precedes everything. And another kind of proof text that supports this idea is that when even before Hashem began creation, another mind-blowing statement that's brought in the Talmud, Mi nimlach, with whom did God consult? So we know in Bereshit, when God is about to create Adam, to create the first human beings, he says, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man, let us make Adam. So who's the us? And even Rashi says this caused a whole uproar among the people who thought the Torah was supposed to promote monotheism. Who's the us? Many opinions. One is God and his angels, God and all the different forces of creation. But the other opinion is with the souls of the righteous. So somehow there's a level of soul that exists before creation that God but decided to consult with before even creating anything, including the Torah. So this is really
Kol